Welcome, and today on Cryptids Unveiled, we're going to be talking about Bigfoot. Now, if you haven't seen the introduction for Cryptids Unveiled, go ahead and check that out. But today, we're not going to talk about Bigfoot from the mainstream perspective. You see, Bigfoot or Sasquatch, as it is most commonly portrayed by the mainstream TV stations and by Bigfoot experts, is this idea that there may be some big ape-like creature running around in the woods. But we think that this topic goes way deeper than what many mainstream researchers are willing to explore because this phenomena bridges into the occult. It lays out a reality that many of us are not ready to perceive, for it truly breaks down our modern viewpoint of reality. We'll start with the most ancient legends and depictions, but in order to do that, we must first understand how Bigfoot is a term that does not truly define what we're dealing with. This usually happens with topics that are meant to be kept secret, as you'll have a term that usually has multiple meanings, and it's crudely applied to the phenomena that it ends up just causing more confusion, and even worse, we have a difficult time figuring out and finding the history of this legend. Now, if there's one thing that is extremely common to all these Bigfoot stories that we must build upon, is that these creatures have human likeness. Many of the accounts from the people who experienced it themselves do not describe them as apes, but as hairy humans. This is going to be a very key factor to keep in mind if we wish to find the true history of this being. Instead of looking for clues by searching for ancient Bigfoot legends, type in ancient legends of the hairy man or the man of the wild. What you will find is that there are in fact several depictions of these beings dating back to the medieval era. The difference is that they are not apes, they are clearly humans. One of these famous medieval books, called the Book of Hours, has several depictions of these hairy beings, but this gets way crazier. Mary Magdalene is one of these Bigfoots, and I'll explain what that means. It's called Hairy Mary, and there are hundreds of these depictions. Why don't the Bigfoot experts or the TV shows ever bring this up? It's because it's an entirely different field, and we have been persuaded to think that Bigfoot is just some missing ape that we never discovered. I mean, just look at all these depictions. It really makes you think about these accounts from the people who say they look human. And if you watch the intro to Cryptids Unveiled, if you remember that guy who was calling these female creatures beautiful, he said they look just like humans. But listen to this. According to Sophronius, Mary eventually went to Jerusalem for the exaltation of the Holy Cross. She was not interested in the religious festival, but was rather looking for more sexual partners. However, she found she could not enter the Church of the Holy Sepulchre until she repented of her lifestyle and promised to become a hermit. Stricken with remorse, she traveled into the wilderness, taking only 3 loaves of bread as sustenance. This starts to get really deep because in some of the Alexander romances, Alexander is said to have come across women with hair down to their feet who lived in the forest, sort of female versions of woad woses. Basically, what they're saying is that when humans go back into the wild, they turn into these beasts or hairy beings. There are actually many different legends referring to this, and that is the Wild Man. Now let's see what Wiki has to say about the Wild Man. Again, this is not really connected with Bigfoot in the mainstream. So Wikipedia says that the Wild Man, also Wild Man or Wild Man of the Woods, is a mythical figure that appears in the artwork and literature of medieval Europe. Notice how they immediately try to connect this with fantasy instead of just observing the images themselves. Many of the times they are simply hairy humans. Again, there are many depictions of these beings in war, and so it makes you think, why was this so prevalent during the Reset Age? Is it because there was a battle between 2 different types of humans? So this legend of the Wild Man actually becomes pretty mind-blowing. I don't remember learning about this in school, do you? There are countless, thousands of depictions of these wild peoples who have hair all over their bodies. Now, in the mainstream, these scholars suggest that this is just a symbol for the human psyche and our desire to be separate from nature as the beast, something closer to God. But perhaps there's something else going on with this legend, especially when we connect it with our modern idea of Bigfoot and Sasquatch. The ancient Greeks depicted multiple races of the humanoid form that lived in India, Ethiopia, and Libya, and other remote lands. One of the first to mention these creatures was Herodotus. In the Historia of the 5th century BC, And keep in mind, this is just a translation, but he states, quote, "There dwelled in Libya the dog-headed man, and the headless that have their eyes in their breasts, and as the Libyans say, the wild man and woman." We have to remember that this is post-reset, so many of these things could have been depicted in a certain light for a specific purpose. But I still find it intriguing the sheer amount of interest in this subject that these ancient minds had. This was a huge religious symbol that seemed to possess esoteric meaning. The first major Christian writer to discuss the monstrous races was Augustine, who traced the hierarchy of the divine order from the Holy Trinity down to the lowest creatures, with the monstrous races between man and the animal kingdom. Also, in the Babylonian epic Gilgamesh, the hairy Enkidu who lives with and protects wild animals is alternatively referred to as man and beast. As I said, if you look into this legend of the wild man, the consensus is that this is just a metaphor. But what we want to do with this episode is connect it with other videos that we have made on Tartaria. In Tartaria Explained Part 3, we talk about these giant savages that were depicted in America. Now, I think these are of a later time, and there has been some conscious decisions to depict these creatures in specific ways. But what if these beings are more closer to the proto-human beings, that they survived some type of cataclysm and had to go live out in the woods or caves to survive? But let's also keep in mind that this could just be a cover-up to depict these creatures as savages, when really they are most likely the ones who built these structures. They are giants. They possess metaphysical powers and are more attuned with nature and have great strength, and in some depictions, they're playing music. So it's very interesting, but just keep in mind that we have those two options, because the Wildman has been said to be a giant and cannibalistic, from medieval text and native legends as well. In the many illustrations of Alexander the Great's conquest and adventures, you see many of these hairy creatures. In this painting, he's ordering these wild men to be thrown in the fire. Here, Alexander is pursuing the river dwellers. It seems as if they are trying to hunt these beings down and get rid of them. How can we trust these depictions if they come from the priest or new rulers and they hunted these beings down so that they could create their civilized society or New World Order? One of these depictions are called Pagan Priest Takes Alexander to Consult with the Trees of the Sun and the Moon, alluding to these beings as shamans and spiritual peoples. I'm sure many of you remember how we've connected the Druids with Tartaria in the past. Well, listen to this. Merlin was depicted as a wild man in medieval text. In a certain legend, he is depicted as a stag. Arthur, who had a strange dream in which he sees a sow with a circle of gold on its head, perplexed by its significance, he becomes increasingly preoccupied to the distress of his barons. Merlin, determined to solve this, magically transforms himself into a large stag and sets out to see the emperor. On his way, people start chasing him, so he runs out and bursts into the emperor's dining hall and announces that only a wild man can interpret the emperor's dream. He then runs out the front door. Then, Arthur the emperor declared that any knight could have his daughter if they just bring him a wild man. No one could do it, but one day, the daughter was out in the forest, and Merlin, disguised as a stag, showed her how to catch a wild man. Merlin then ran off and transformed into a wild man, and then fell for his own trap, so that he could explain the dream to Arthur disguised as a wild man sage. Similar to these other stories of the wild man being a pagan. Then we have these depictions of the wild man with unicorns, and most know that the unicorn is a metaphysical symbol, a rare creature that seems to be protected by these creatures. You see these beings as warriors and as knights, as if they were being used by the priesthood for land and for working. Now this connects with monstrous races, so I thought I'd mention it, but that will have to be for its own episode. Many of these religious medieval texts speak of these different deformed races of man. There are maps that describe where they live, and they seem to spiritually place these beings above the animal kingdom. We will have to dive into this with its own episode. Another theme of the wild man is storming the castle of love, and maybe this is another symbol. The scholars depict this as the savages or the passion of men trying to get into the hearts of women or being accepted into her temple from an allegorical perspective, but I just wonder if maybe there's something more to this. We have these giant beings trying to enter castles, and this goes back to whether or not there was a time after Cataclysm where many of these beings became savages and warlike. We have these depictions of the lady leading the wild man with a rope, as if this new human is the more civilized being, or maybe it represents the female making man tame. We have Saint Onofrius. The kneeling Saint Onofrius crowned and holds a patriarchal cross in both hands. He has hair all over his body tinted blue. It is said Onofrius lived in the 4th century and is one of the better known ascetic saints. According to the legend, he was the son of a pagan ruler. His diet consisted of bread and the dates of palm trees. There are depictions of wild man on horseback that give the impression that these are more than just symbols, but some type of study from life. Then many illustrations show wild man with fabulous beasts and strange creatures. Now, some of you may think that this could be hypertrichosis, otherwise known as werewolf syndrome. This is interesting, and I do think that it may be connected, but this is most likely some mutation or some kind of lineage to wild people perhaps, and it just happens on rare occasions as well. It doesn't seem that the wild man is the same phenomena because in almost all these depictions, they don't have hair on their face.
The Genosqua is a subspecies of Sasquatch mentioned in Native American folklore as the Stone Giant Man. In Iroquois legend, this hairy hominid was known as Atne Yarhead, or Atne Yarhe, which also translates to Stone Giant or Stone Coat. It is often said to be Sasquatch's larger, bulkier, and more aggressive cousin. It has rock-hard skin and supposedly kills humans. It's also known to throw rocks at humans. They are said to be much more aggressive than most other Sasquatch and appear to be very violent and territorial. The story also talks about how these beings put mud all over their body and lay in the sun until it hardens so that they can use it as armor.
In other episodes of Tartaria, we've discussed how there are many legends of giants in Native American lore as well. They're also depicted as giants and raiders, but in other legends they said that they built the railroads and had a great knowledge of electricity. I also forgot to mention that Bigfoot is mentioned in the Bible. Esau was born covered with hair, Genesis 25:25, and his descendants, the Edomites, were enemies of Israel. These facts led some to speculate that the creatures we call Bigfoot are actually modern-day Edomites who have inherited Esau's traits of being a man of the field, Genesis 25:27. One of the earliest pictographs is the Hairy Man pictograph in Tool River, California. The painting represents a two-legged creature with its arms spread wide. He has what appears to be long hair and large haunting eyes. Probably the most unusual feature of the site is the presence of an entire Bigfoot family. Besides the male hairy man, there are also a female and child Bigfoot. The mother measures 1.8 meters high by 1.2 meters wide, and is solely red like her husband. She represents a two-legged creature with her arms open. She has 5 fingers and little other detail. This goes with a story on how the people were made, where all the animals on the mountain were trying to decide what the new human should be like, and then interestingly, it became a battle between the coyote and the hairy man to decide how the new human would walk. The skunk ape has been part of Florida, Georgia, and Alabama folklore since the European settler period. Seminole myth speaks of a similar foul-smelling, physically powerful, and secretive creature called Eski Kapkaki, a name which roughly translates as cannibal giant. One of the first reports of a large ape-like creature in Florida came from 1818 when a report from what is now Apalachicola, Florida, spoke of a man-sized monkey or ape raiding food stores and stalking fishermen. The Falk monster, also known as the Boggy Creek monster and the Swamp Stalker, is purported to be an ape-like creature similar to descriptions of Bigfoot that was allegedly sighted in the rural town of Falk, Arkansas during the early 1970s. The creature was alleged to have attacked a local family. Duzunukwa, a forest giant who lives on Vancouver Island, Duzunukwa is covered in dark hair. She speaks in a quivering voice through pursed lips. Kwa 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 wa, children who wander outside the night could get snatched by the creature who might cook and eat them or just raise them as her own children. Sasquatch. Muckleshoot tribal members do not speak of Sasquatch. Doing so would draw one to you, says tribal member Roma John Thomas. They are human-like, covered in fur and over 7 feet tall with 20-inch long footprints. They can render humans unconscious with just one touch and are known to steal dried fish and women. Don't whistle at night, that's how they communicate. Slapu. Anne Jack, a Muckleshoot woman born in the 1840s, told Auburn anthropologist Arthur Ballard about Slapu, a hairy ogress that also was called Snail Woman. She too was a stealer of children. Matlox is a Bigfoot-like cannibal giant described in legends in western Canada. The Matlox is described as being covered in stiff, black hair, having a large head similar to that of a human's, sharp fangs, long arms, and claws on each of its fingers and toes. José Mariano Mocino, a Spanish naturalist, writes in his book Noticias de Nootka, an account of Nootka Sound in 1792, a description of the giant. Quote, I do not know what to say about Matlox, inhabitant of the mountainous districts, of who all have an unbelievable terror. They imagine his body as very monstrous, all covered with stiff black bristles, a head similar to a human one, but with much greater, sharper, and stronger fangs than those of a bear, extremely long arms, and toes and fingers armed with long, curved claws. His shouts alone, they say, force those who hear them to the ground, and any unfortunate body he slaps is broken into 1,000 pieces. And I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right, but the Abnalayu is the Russian analog of Bigfoot Sasquatch, commonly linked to the Almas, said to roam the lands around the Caucasus mountain range. Like other potential relict hominoid habitats, the Caucasus is heavily forested and sparsely populated in many areas, allowing plenty of room for both a large creature to roam and legends to grow. They are usually described as muscular and are about the same size as a grown human. They have reddish black hair, a low brow, reddish eyes, and high cheekbones. While sightings occasionally describe them making garbled noises, they don't seem capable of human speech. They are sometimes seen using sticks and rocks as tools or weapons. The Argopelter is a fearsome critter said to inhabit hollow trees of the conifer woods from Maine to Oregon. It doesn't like anything crossing its path or coming into its territory. If they come close enough, it will hurl wood splinters and branches at the intruder. Some have described the creature as a hairy humanoid similar to Sasquatch, but slightly smaller. The Almas is an ape-like cryptid reported from Central Asia. They are said to inhabit the Asian mountain regions of Pamir and Caucasus, as well as the Mongolian mountain range, Altai. Sightings of the Almas date back as early as the 15th century. This creature has been sighted walking upright just like a human. In fact, it looks more human than a Bigfoot-type creature, even said to craft clothes and tools. It is said to resemble a living caveman. Their bodies are covered entirely with thick brown to reddish-brown hair. Also, Almas is Mongolian word for wild man. The Merikoksi were a tribe which was allegedly encountered in the Amazon by explorer Colonel Percy Fawcett. Although he described them as being hairy as a dog, they also lived in villages and used tools. According to Fawcett, they lived in the northeast of the Maksubi tribe. In Basque mythology, and this is extremely interesting, the Basajuan or Basaxuan, Lord of the Woods, is a hairy and generally peaceful giant originating from Basque and Navarre mythology. And it's super intriguing, so listen closely to this. The Basajuanak were thought to build megaliths and keep the secret to various skills and technological advancements humans learned through trickery. So they built megaliths. Moving on, the Yeren is China's Bigfoot, variously referred to as the Yeren, Yeren, Chinese wild man, or man monkey. The Yeren is a mysterious primate living in the mountains of China, with most of the sightings coming from the remote Hubei province. It has reddish-brown hair, though very rare sighting of white Yeren have been seen. This may indicate either albinism or elderly members of the species, and they have a large jaw. It is 6 to 8 feet tall, and in a few extreme cases they were reported to up to 12 feet tall, and is generally friendly but reserved around humans. The Batutut or Yuji, sometimes also known as forest people, wild man, or Negro Rong, is a proposed humanoid cryptid reportedly similar to Bigfoot, thought to inhabit the Vieux Quang Nature Reserve and other wilderness areas of Vietnam, Laos, and northern Borneo. The June Judi is a type of Bigfoot from Australia. They are hairy humanoid creatures that are 2 to 3 feet tall, have black fur, and are said to have large white fangs and red eyes. They live in groups where they live in caves or natural hollows of boulders. They are generally thought of as harmless, though they can be aggressive. June Judis eat shellfish and honey and have sort of a chirping language. The Hypogon or Hynagon is a Japanese version of North America's Bigfoot. Said to live on Mount Hiba of the Hiroshima Prefecture, not much is known about the Hypogon, but some say that it is a quiet beast that is said to run from 4 armed residents then hunt them. Like all hominids, they have a unique stench that is said to smell like decomposing flesh. There are actually so many different ones, but these stories are from all around the world. Check out the description if you want to see all the different names for Bigfoot. So now that we know more about the myth and legends behind these beings, we're going to examine some of the common themes that we find in the accounts told by those who experienced them. We will also be referencing the legends to understand further, but there's so much to consider when it comes to these beings because there's a supernatural component. Many of the cryptids that could also be listed as Bigfoot were not used because they have a more spiritual component as being some type of spirit or demon, but still very common themes. In many of these stories of Bigfoot, they have supernatural powers. Physically, they have extreme agility and strength, but many describe these beings as floating or moving in a very odd way as if they're gliding or some type of Olympic gymnast or something. Like they have a very difficult time describing whatever it is and how they move. And it's extremely strange. Some have even described it as a ghost or some paranormal spirit being, that it was just an unexplainable movement. Then many have been known to receive telepathic communications with these creatures, knowing that they need to leave or that they want to be left alone and that this is not where they need to be right now, and this is all through thought. Now, this is where it kind of gets crazy, but UFOs and strange technologies also tie into this. Some have said that they have cloaking abilities like the Predators and the Alien movies. If we also consider the stories from Skinwalker Ranch, there are these stories of strange lights, paranormal occurrences, and some type of Bigfoot that floated in this strange movement. And is this some kind of parallel with Skinwalker Ranch and the connection between UFOs and Bigfoot? As we have seen, there are nice and evil versions of these beings. Some just want to be left alone, and others will fight and steal from whatever they can find. Many of these aggressive Bigfoot stories involve the throwing of rocks, vocalizations that they can use as weapons to reverberate in a very deep tone to entirely shake the victim from the inside out, causing great fear. They have this horrible stench of rotting and death that accompanies these aggressive types. They still look human, but many have described these as having Down syndrome or having no white in the eyes as well. Now, for the peaceful ones, they have been known to be seen with a leader, one with whitish hair because of its age, and these also may live underground and or in the caves. There are also stories of children who even befriended young Bigfoot beings for a time. There's also a reference to hairy humanoid beings that lived in an underground maze because he was banished in the movie Journey to the Center of the Earth. So, if you remember the story from the introduction, the one with the biker and the lady who was babysitting the Bigfoot babies, at the end he talked about star people. I found this very interesting and I want to do our best to assist in painting this picture. Bigfoot, or wild man, or the man of the woods, is an early prototype human, the original human, or a better way to say it is that they are the undomesticated version of us. For example, take a pig and a hog, or a dog and a wolf. We have been groomed into a current state and specifically chosen by some higher beings in this realm. And then the question becomes, who are these beings? Now, that's a topic for a whole nother video, and I tend to stray away from extraterrestrial explanations that line up with the modern understanding of alien intervention, but there could be something to it just in a different way than this millions of light years away on another blue marble in deep space type concept with planets and whatnot. But what we're talking about is we're discussing different human races or different paths that the human genome has taken. Who are these star people? It's like they are another version of human or a breakaway civilization that is watching over us and most likely influencing this entire experiment. If you listen to the story, at a certain age, the star people come and pick up the Bigfoot, most likely for checking and to verify their safety, because this breakaway civilization of advanced humans are most likely some type of spiritual being from a previous age that has been watching us for aeons. At least some of them want to make sure that these ancient beings survive. An interesting reference to this is Sylvia from The Truman Show. She watches over Truman from the outside and wants to protect him and save him. Sylvia means spirit of the woods. Now the question is, are these the same beings that genetically engineered us? Or are there several variations of this human form and we can't even begin to comprehend this because we start to get into the occult and the creation of races that was kind of alluded to earlier with the concept of different hybrids and monstrous races. I wouldn't be surprised if there are groups of these hairy men that are quite advanced. Which brings us to question, is this the more original human or a more true primordial form? Or do we turn into these types of beings once reuniting with the wild? Did these beings exist after the flood, and do they have anything to do with Tartaria? Maybe this is connected with the other legends of giants where there could be something going on that the elite does not want us to know about, because if we found out about Bigfoot and that they exist or other advanced spiritual humans, it would throw evolution out of the water and change our entire perception of reality. We might become wild men again, and then the entire experiment would fall apart. This would bring us to our final point.
Could we be repeating a cycle in which the beings who are no longer a part of the experiment are pushed to inhabit the outskirts of the modern world? Are mysterious humanoid beings the humans from previous ages? Could it be that the experiment of society and eugenics continues as specific types of humans become more common while others become more scarce? Think about what's happening now with the medical establishment. Children are not growing fully, they're becoming smaller, weaker, and what happens in the future where everyone is produced in a lab and through eugenics. Let's look back at Brave New World and we see how the people in the outskirts were considered wild people, savages. They were like an attraction to see and point fingers at. It's a very similar story in H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. In that book, the civilized beings resembled children and the uncivilized beings are thought to be monsters. Will some of us become the next Bigfoot or mysterious hairy human whose existence is denied by the inner society? There will always be those who refuse to be a part of the new system. Perhaps people who make their way into the woods and remain the same, while civilization is tweaked and molded into new forms. Anyway, thank you all for your support. We have a lot more cryptids to go over. We hope you enjoyed this one. If you could please like and subscribe and maybe tell a friend, it would really mean a lot to us. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the subject, so feel free to leave a comment. Hope you like this one, and all we can hope is that our minds may be unveiled.
Let go of everything you think to be true. Relax the mind and ask the question, do I truly understand what this reality is?